I want to talk about Steve Bray, and he's a man I find interesting, partly because of his run-ins with Lee Anderson. But before I do that, I want to talk about the term Protestant, which comes from the Latin word protestare, which means to declare publicly, to testify, to protest, to shout. And it entered English from the French protestant, but first used in the mid-16th century to describe those who protested against certain practices and doctrines of the Catholic Church during the Reformation. Its origin comes from the Latin forth and pro, which means forth, and testare, which means to bear witness, from testis, meaning witness. And its first political use was from the Diet of Speyer in 1529, where a group of German princes and city leaders issued a formal protestatio against the imperial ban on Martin Luther's teaching, and they asserted their right to religious self-determination. Thus Protestants were born. And over time the word Protestant has become the label for a diverse set of Christian denominations and movements that rejected papal authority and tried to reform the church along scriptural lines, so Lutheranism, Calvinism, Anglicanism. But the notion of a protest as a vocal opposition, especially shouting, has both religious and political resonance, and the vocal element is tied to the etymological root, to bear witness publicly, often loudly, even defiantly. Luther in the Diet of Worms in 1521 is reputed to say, "Here I stand, I can do no other," a defiant declaration in the face of excommunication. Though not shouted, it was a theatrical speech of protest. The 17th century English Puritans and dissenters took to shouting their sermons in public spaces, especially when barred from churches, and the noise was seen both as a religious act and a political demonstration of defiance. The American revivalist traditions of the 19th and the 18th century brought American preaching that was loud, emotional, and protesting against lukewarm religion and moral decline. The Levellers in the 1640s in the UK, the French Revolution, the storming of the Bastille, the chanting of "Down with tyranny" exemplified shouting as protest. Raw, public, ideologically charged. The Civil Rights Movement, the chanted slogans, "We shall overcome," combining spiritual heritage with direct political action. The Arab Spring, the demonstration in Tahrir Square, where people were shouting, "The people want the fall of the regime." The protest both literal and sonic, with religious undertones in many cases. The word Protestant, therefore, the idea of to protest fuses voice, dissent, and identity, and therefore, that is the problem with Steve Bray. This could just be a man of a megaphone and a medley of the Muppet Show and Darth Vader. But the tale of Steve Bray, I think the anti-Brexit campaigner, the musical satirist, perhaps the only person to ever be cross-examined in court for playing "I Predict a Riot" as a form of protest, Steve Bray, this former coin dealer from Port Talbot, rose to fame or notoriety, depending on your political persuasion, as the human foghorn of Westminster, donning a Union flag, a top hat, and a perpetual frown at the state of post-referendum Britain. He's been a persistent and noisy presence outside Parliament since 2017. Each Wednesday, like political clockwork, he sets up on a traffic island near the College Green, armed with banners and speakers, and he treats MPs to protest renditions of D. Ream's Things Can Only Get Better, Beatles-themed Brexit ballads. For Rishi Sunak, a Star Wars fan, Bray even curated a specialist playlist featuring the Imperial March. He is in every sense a one-man satire orchestra. But this particular case centres on the now infamous Wednesday on March the 20th, 2024, when police officers apparently tipped off about Bray's sonic routine ahead of Prime Minister's questions, handed him a prohibition notice and a map. The area he was in, they said, was under a bylaw restricting amplified noise under the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011, and Bray, undeterred, contested their cartography. "You've got the wrong map," he told them. It was, according to him, out of date, and in his own defence, he cited a previous occasion when police apologised for seizing his equipment after admitting they'd misinterpreted the control zone. and the music resumed, and the officers returned, and the speakers were confiscated, though he was not arrested. Now he stands charged with non-compliance of a lawful direction. And what was he doing? He was making noise. He was protesting. And under recent legislation and interpretation, that's no longer a right if the police say so. So the police, under the new laws, can absolutely prohibit protesting. They can prohibit a protest. And this trial, though centered on one man, asks a much larger question. What is a protest if it's not vocal, if it's not loud disruption? Bray's critics in court include staffers from the Conservative MPs and from the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman's Chief of Staff, and they described the protest as intimidating, harassing and exhausting. One said it was audible on the 6th floor, another called it fanaticism. And yet Bray is not accused of violence, nor even of threatening behaviour. His tools were irony, volume and music. His targets, policies, politicians, not individuals. He's since apologised for causing distress and even offered a relocation outside the restricted zone if police had clearly requested it. But the prosecution maintains that he defied a law as written. And the law now offers officers to curtail protest not based on violence or incitement, but on noise alone. And here's where the case turns absurd. A man in court for playing the Muppet Show outside Parliament, the very seat of British democracy. We need to pause and marvel at that sentence. If protest is stripped of its visual or its oral bite, then it becomes theatre without actors, politics without argument. It's a protest only in name. It's an emasculated protest. And the irony is delicious. This very law, introduced by a government that praised free speech, is being used to silence a man with speakers. Laws originally aimed at curbing Just Stop Oil activists gluing themselves to motorways are now being used to seize a man's stereo for serenading MPs with political parody. We have reached a moment where comedy becomes criminal if too loud, and dissent becomes deviance if too frequent. At what point is it too loud? Bray has never been arrested before, nor charged with any protest-related offence until now. He's fought his career as his own lawyer, cross-examined witnesses, even played Yellow Submarine with altered lyrics, lamenting a Brexit tragedy during his closing arguments. The judge will deliver his verdict on April the 14th. Whichever way this case falls, the implications are striking. If the court rules against him, it will be a signal that political noise is now negotiable, and protest must operate within a carefully mapped bureaucratic whisper. And Steve Bray is annoying. He is loud. He is theatrical, but that is not a crime. The right to protest is not the right to be polite. It's the right to be heard, even when the message is unpopular, inconvenient, or even musical. And the British tradition of eccentric dissent, from suffragettes chaining themselves to railings to anti-war singers in Parliament Square, is not merely cultural decoration, it is democratic heritage. If we are now policing decibels as a measure of legality, then it is not Bray who is out of order, it's the law itself, and the law needs to be challenged, and the law must be wrong.